They called me fragile. They called me a ghost. They called me a burden. My name is Elara, and the first sound I ever made was a cry that heralded my mother's death. My arrival into this world was not a celebration, but a tragedy. My father, Lord Theron of the Highland House of Athel, lost his beloved wife in the process of my birth. The healers called it a terrible complication, a twist of cruel fate, but I knew the truth, the one that settled into the stone of our ancestral home, Aethelgard. My first act was to take a life. That truth was the silent current beneath every look, every sigh in the halls of my childhood. I was loved, but I was the reason for a profound and lingering sorrow. My brother, Calin, was 5 years my senior, a boy forged from sunlight and solid earth. Even as a child he was strong, his laughter echoing where mine was a mere whisper. I was the opposite. I was small, perpetually pale, a creature of the quiet corners and the soft blankets by the fire. I never ran through the meadows with him. While he learned swordplay, I learned the textures of velvet and the weight of silence. The healers came, one after another, their faces growing graver with each visit. They would place glowing hands on my forehead, murmur incantations, and study the lines on my tiny palms. Their diagnoses were always the same, a symphony of helplessness. A delicate constitution, one would say. A spirit too fine for this harsh world, another would conclude. She may not see her 10th winter, was the most common whispered prophecy. I proved them wrong, but only just. I survived my 10th birthday in my bed, watching the festivities for Calin from my window. I made it to my 15th, leaning on my father's arm for a brief moment in the hall before retreating, dizzy and weak. Survival, however, is not the same as living. My world was a small, dimly lit room. Books were my companions, my window to a world I could not touch. I would read tales of warriors and queens, of epic journeys and grand magic, and feel a hollow ache. That was not my story. My story was one of fatigue, of mysterious pains that danced along my bones like cold fire, of fainting spells that stole the world away without warning. By the time I turned 20, I was a relic in my own home. My father, his heart worn down by loss and worry, passed when I was 22, falling to a fever that my own mysterious ailment could not, or would not, heal. Calin became Lord of Aethelgard, a young man carrying the weight of our lands and his fading sister. His love was fierce, but it was edged with a frustration he could not hide. I saw it when I had to leave a gathering early, when a simple walk required a chair to be brought for me, when my very existence complicated his duties. I was the problem with no solution, the locked door with no key. And then, the world beyond our sheltered highlands began to fracture. The kingdom of Valerius, which our lands bordered, had known peace for generations under its immortal Lycan sovereigns. But to the east, the iron-fisted empire of Vorlag stirred. Border skirmishes turned into raids, then into declarations of war. Our lands, Aethelgard, were not just a picturesque highland holding. We were the gatekeepers. The Aethel Pass cut through the mountains behind our castle, the single viable route for an army to cross the dragon's spine and strike at the heart of Valerius. We were the shield, and Vorlag wanted to break it. The summons arrived on a day when the pain was a dull, ever-present thrum in my temples. The parchment was heavy, sealed with black wax imprinted with the sigil of a snarling wolf's head, the mark of King Valerius himself. Calin brought it to my solar, his expression unreadable, a mask of the lord he now had to be. "Elara," he said, his voice too carefully neutral. "We are summoned to the capital, to Blackstone Keep. The king wishes to discuss an alliance." The air left my lungs. I knew, with the cold certainty of one who has always been a liability, what form that alliance would take. "Kaelin, no, you cannot. Look at me. I am not a bargaining piece. I am a sentence of death for any alliance." He knelt before my chair, taking my thin hands in his strong, calloused ones. "It is not about what you are, sister. It is about what we must do. Vorlag masses 10,000 soldiers at the eastern mouth of the pass. I have 500 men. Without the king's legions, we fall, and if we fall, the pass falls, and Valerius is split in two. This is the price. Our family has guarded this pass for centuries. This is how we guard it now." The resignation in his eyes was worse than anger. "I will be a disgrace," I whispered, the shame of physical heat on my skin. "They will see me and know you are desperate." "Then let them see your strength," he said, but the words rang hollow. What strength? The strength to turn a page without my hand trembling? The strength to sip broth? 3 days later we began the journey. It was a procession of my humiliation. The royal carriage, meant to be a comfort, was a prison of jolting movement. Every stone on the road sent a shock through my frail body. We had to stop constantly, my brother's face growing tighter each time, his commander's patience a thin veneer over their disdain. The world outside my window was a blur of green and gray I was too ill to appreciate. After 7 days of torment, Blackstone Keep rose before us, a monolith carved from the mountain itself. It was all sharp angles and ominous shadows, a fortress that looked less built and more erupted from the bones of the earth. As the carriage door opened, I saw them, rows of courtiers in silks and furs, lining the grand staircase, their eyes like polished stones, waiting to assess the new commodity. I took a deep breath, gathered the tattered remnants of my dignity, and stepped out. The chill mountain air hit me like a blow. I took 1 step, then 2. On the 3rd, my legs, those traitorous pillars of failed flesh, dissolved. The world tilted. I would have crumpled onto the unforgiving cobblestones if a quick-footed guard had not caught me. A wave of sound, not gasps of concern but titters of mockery, hissed commentary, washed over me. By the gods, she can't even stand. Is she ill or merely feeble? What a pathetic offering. The words were arrows, each finding its mark. Then Kaelin was there, his face a storm cloud. Without a word, he swept me into his arms, carrying me up the grand staircase like a child, or like a sack of grain. My cheek was pressed against the cold metal of his armor, but I could not block out the sight of the smirking nobility, their eyes feasting on my weakness. This was my introduction to the court of the Wolf King.
I was not a future queen. I was a joke. I was deposited in chambers of oppressive luxury. The rooms were vast, hung with tapestries depicting heroic battles and legendary beasts, the furniture heavy and dark. A fire roared in the hearth, but its heat did not reach the chill in my soul. A healer arrived, an elderly woman with kind eyes named Mistress Yvain. She examined me with a thoroughness I had come to expect, and a gentleness I had not. Her hands glowed with a soft green light as they passed over me. After a long silence, she sat back, her wrinkled face creased with profound puzzlement. "My lady," she said softly, "I can find no sickness, no curse, no inherent flaw in your spirit or your blood. Your life force it is like a river that has been running at flood for years, but I cannot see the source of the water, nor where it is going. It is simply depleted. I am sorry." The old, familiar hopelessness settled over me. "Thank you for trying," I murmured, the words ashes in my mouth. Not long after, a stern-faced chamberlain arrived. "The king requests your presence at the evening feast. It is the formal presentation." The words were a death knell. I wanted to refuse, to bury myself in the heavy blankets and never emerge, but I thought of Kaelin's strained face, of our people in the highlands, of the pass that needed guarding. My duty, for once, was clear, even if it was to walk to my own execution by ridicule. My maids, efficient and silent, dressed me in a gown of deep sapphire velvet, the color of a midnight sky. They piled my chestnut hair into an intricate design of braids and curls, pinning it with silver stars. They applied subtle rouge to my cheeks and a stain to my lips. For a fleeting moment, as I looked in the full-length mirror, I saw a stranger, a noblewoman of ethereal porcelain beauty. Then I tried to stand without holding the dresser, and the room swam violently. The illusion shattered, leaving only me, Elara, trembling and afraid. The walk to the great hall was a descent into a predator's den. The corridors were lined with more watching eyes, whispers trailing me like phantoms. That's her, the Ethel invalid. I give her a month. The hall itself was a breathtaking, terrifying spectacle, vast enough to hold a forest, its ceiling lost in shadowy heights. 2 enormous fireplaces roared at either end, and between them long tables groaned under the weight of silver and food. Hundreds of people filled the space, a cacophony of laughter, chatter, and the clink of goblets. All of it died to a low hum as I entered. Every head turned. I kept my eyes fixed on the far end of the hall, where a dais held a single, massive table, and there, at its center, was the king, King Valerius. He was not just tall, he was monumental. Even seated, he dominated the space, his shoulders impossibly broad. He wore black, unadorned but for a simple silver torque at his throat. His hair was the color of aged pewter, long and tied back, revealing a face that was all stark planes and ruthless angles, a face that had seen centuries pass. He was not looking at the crowd or at the food. He was looking directly at me, and his eyes, they were not human. They glowed with a steady, unwavering amber light, like coals from a banked fire. They tracked my painfully slow progress with an unnerving, unblinking focus. My escort led me up the 3 steps to the high table. The king did not rise, he did not smile, he simply gestured with a slight tilt of his chin to the empty, ornate chair to his right. I sank into it, my bones grateful for the reprieve, my spirit screaming in humiliation. The feast began. Servants streamed forth with platters of roasted meats, steaming pies, glistening fruits. The king ate methodically, speaking sparingly to the grim-faced man on his left, his commander. He did not address me. I picked at the food before me, the rich smells turning my stomach. One by one, nobles approached the dais to pay their respects. They bowed to the king, offered flowery words, and their eyes slid over me with a mix of pity, curiosity, and blatant dismissal. Then came Lady Rowena. She was beautiful in a sharp, calculated way, her gown a daring crimson. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice a sweet chime, "allow me to be the first to offer congratulations on your upcoming union. Such an expected choice." Her gaze flicked to me, dissecting. "My cousin, Lady Seraphina, was just saying how inspiring it is to see such fortitude in one so clearly suited for a quieter life." It was an elegant insult, a challenge. The old Elara would have lowered her eyes, accepted the blow. But something in me, some spark buried under years of helplessness, ignited. I looked directly at Lady Rowena, my voice quiet but clear in the sudden lull that had fallen at our end of the table. "How kind of Lady Seraphina to think of me. I understand she has recently retired to the country air for her health. The damp of the capital can be so trying for those of a certain delicate age and constitution. A beat of stunned silence. Lady Rowena's smile froze, then melted into a tight line. The king beside me made a sound, a low, rough exhale that was almost but not quite a laugh. He turned those burning amber eyes on Lady Rowena. "Your cousin's concern is noted, as is my bride's perceptiveness." Rowena retreated, flushed. A small, fierce thrill went through me, followed immediately by a wave of dizziness. I had drawn a line, but I was standing on shaky ground. Then, as the desserts were being cleared, an elderly lord rose, tapping his crystal goblet. The hall quieted. "My king, my lords and ladies, we observe an old tradition tonight, that our future queen may demonstrate the quality she brings to the wolf throne, be it strength of arm, sharpness of mind, or purity of magic. Lady Elara, what will you show us?" The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold. This was it, the moment of true exposure. I had no martial skill. My mind, though sharp from reading, was no tactical genius. Magic, a bitter joke. I pushed myself to my feet, the table my only anchor. The hall seemed to stretch and warp around me. "I offer," I began, my voice thin but carrying in the utter silence, "my resilience. I have survived 24 years in a body that has been my prison. To endure when every day is a battle against your own fragility, that forges a kind of strength no sword can match." It was a plea, not a demonstration. A murmur rippled through the crowd, polite, dismissive. I tried to step back, to sit down with some grace. My legs, pushed beyond their limit, buckled entirely. I fell, not with a cry, but with a heavy, final thud onto the cold stone floor. The impact knocked the breath from me. For a second, there was only shock.
Then the laughter came. Not raucous, but a soft, pervasive wave of it, the sound of 100 people confirming their worst suspicions. Heat flooded my face, hotter than any fever. I pushed myself up on trembling arms, only for them to give way again. I was trapped, a beetle on its back, in front of the entire court. A servant rushed forward. "Don't touch me!" I hissed, the humiliation fueling a desperate anger. "I can do it myself!" But I couldn't. The room began to spin in earnest. Then chaos erupted nearby. A young serving girl, eyes wide with panic at the commotion I'd caused, stumbled. The tray of silver wine goblets she carried clattered to the ground. One shattered, and a wicked shard sliced deep across the back of her hand. She cried out, clutching it, blood welling instantly and dripping onto the stone. "A healer!" someone shouted. But before anyone could move, something miraculous and terrifying happened. The bleeding stopped. The edges of the wound seemed to pull together, the skin weaving itself whole before our eyes. In 3 heartbeats, only a faint pink line remained. The girl stared, dumbfounded, and as her hand healed, a wave of absolute, soul-crushing exhaustion slammed into me. It was a suction from my very core, a draining more profound than any I had ever known. The laughter, the faces, the glowing amber eyes of the king, all of it blurred, darkened, and was swallowed by an endless, silent black. I surfaced from the darkness slowly, fighting my way back to consciousness as if swimming up from a deep, cold lake. My body felt hollowed out, a shell of dried clay. The first thing I became aware of was the scent, not the floral perfumes of my guest chambers, but something primal and clean, aged leather, cold stone, and a faint, wild aroma of pine and autumn air. I was in a massive bed, the linen soft but unfamiliar. The room was large, sparsely furnished with heavy, functional pieces. A fire crackled in a hearth big enough to stand in, and in a high-backed chair beside the bed, illuminated by a single candle, sat King Valerius. He was reading a thick, leather-bound tome. He looked different out of his formal attire, in a simple dark tunic, but his eyes, when they lifted from the page to meet mine, still burned with that same ancient amber light. "You are awake," he stated. His voice was a low rumble, like distant rocks shifting. "Do you remember the hall?" Fragments assaulted me. The fall, the laughter, the cut, the miracle. The shame returned, a leaden weight. "I remember failing," I whispered, my throat parched. "You should annul the betrothal. They are right. I am broken." "You are not broken." He closed the book with a definitive thump. "You are a soul healer, Elara, one of perhaps a dozen born in a millennium, and you have been dying from it since your first breath." I stared, my mind refusing to grasp the words. "That's impossible. I have no magic. Every tested for the magics they knew," he interrupted, leaning forward. The intensity of his gaze was a physical pressure. "Your gift does not answer to spells or commands. It works on instinct, a reflex of your very soul. Every injury, every hurt, every scraped knee or bruised heart that has come near you for 24 years, your life force has reached out to mend it. You have been pouring the essence of who you are into everyone around you constantly, without cease or control. No healer could diagnose you because the cause was not an illness. It was an unstoppable, self-sacrificing generosity that was bleeding you dry. The truth of it, the devastating, beautiful, horrifying logic, unfolded inside me like a poisonous flower. My nurse's burned hand, healed overnight when I was a child. My brother's swift recovery from a fever that felled stronger men. The stable boy's mended broken arm. All the sudden, crushing bouts of fatigue that followed any minor accident in the household. It wasn't bad luck. It was me. I was a leaky vessel, spilling my life onto everyone. All this time, my voice broke. All this pain because I was helping people? Because you were helping them without choice, without limit, and without knowledge, he corrected, his tone not unkind, but relentlessly factual. It is a magnificent gift. Untrained, it is a death sentence. He rose, his massive frame seeming to fill the room. "I am 427 years old, Elara. I have seen this once before. The healer died at 19, wasted to a shadow." "Why tell me this?" I asked, the question a plea. "Why not just send me home to die quietly and find a stronger bride?" He stood at the foot of the bed, a silhouette against the firelight. "I made a vow to protect this kingdom. Your gift, controlled, could be a greater shield than any army, because I do not let ignorance mock what it cannot understand, and because—" He paused, the amber of his eyes flickering. "I see a strength in you that has nothing to do with muscle, the strength to endure that draining for 24 years and still have a spark of fire left to insult Lady Rowena." A faint hysterical sound escaped me, something between a sob and a laugh. "Will you let me help you?" he asked. It was not the command of a king, but the question of a man offering a lifeline. I looked at my hands, thin and pale on the dark blankets. I thought of a life spent in a bed versus a chance, however slim, to understand the curse that had shaped my existence, to maybe, somehow, use it. "Yes," I breathed. "What must I do?" "First, you rest. Truly rest. You are in my private wing. No one enters without my leave. Here you are shielded from the minor hurts of the court. Your gift has nowhere to reach, no one to drain you. For the first time, your life force is your own." The next morning began my education. Mistress Yvain returned, but with a different air. She was joined by an even older man, introduced as Master Aldrich, the royal archivist of esoteric arts. They explained the theory. My soul, they said, was not bound tightly to my body like most. It was porous, empathetic, connected to the life essence of others. Injury created a rift in that essence, and my soul instinctively poured itself out to fill it, to make it whole. Think of your consciousness as a ruler in a castle. Your gift is the garrison, loyal but overzealous. They rush out to fight every perceived threat, even a stray cat scratching at the moat, leaving the castle undefended. You must learn to be the ruler, to assess the threat, to command the garrison, to open the gates only when necessary. The practice was agonizing. It was all mental discipline, a torture of the mind. They began with meditation, teaching me to visualize my own life force as a well of light within my chest. I had to sit for hours, focusing on that light, feeling its boundaries. At first, I felt nothing but my own heartbeat and the ever-present ache. Then, slowly, I became aware of a faint, warm pulse, a gentle glow behind my breastbone. That was my core. Next, they taught me to visualize walls around that well. Not to block the gift entirely, but to control the flow. The first test was a servant with a deliberately pricked finger. I sat across the room, my eyes closed, building my mental fortress. I felt it, a sudden, sharp pull from my center, a warmth wanting to surge toward the tiny hurt. It was instinctive, powerful. I clenched my teeth, envisioning stone blocks, layering them. The pull eased, became a gentle tug. I had held it back. I was drenched in sweat, but I had not healed her. It was my first trembling victory. The tests grew harder. A cook with a minor burn, a guardsman with a bruised knuckle from training. Each injury was a siren's call, demanding my energy. I failed often. The pull would win, a thread of my light would escape and seal the hurt, and I would be left dizzy and nauseated. But each failure taught me the feeling, the warning sign. I learned to recognize the specific warmth that preceded my gift's activation. King Valerius, as he gruffly told me to call him in private, visited each evening. He did not coddle me. He asked for reports from Yvain and Aldrich, then would sit and talk. He told me of his own struggles learning control as a young Lycan, the terror and chaos of his first uncontrolled shifts. "Strength is not the absence of struggle," he said one night, watching me push food around a plate after a particularly draining session. "It is the will to continue the struggle. You have more of that than any warrior in my hall." His words were a balm. For the first time, someone saw my survival not as pathetic, but as perseverance. One afternoon, he did not come alone. He brought the wolves, 5 of them. They padded into the room on silent paws, and my breath caught. They were not beasts, they were incarnations of primal power. The largest, a wolf of pure shadow with eyes like glacial ice, was named Frost. He assessed me with a dispassionate intelligence that felt more human than animal. A sleek, silver-gray female with restless energy was Gale. A brute of a creature with a coat of earthy brown and calm, watchful eyes was Stone. A younger, copper-furred male with an inquisitive tilt to his head was Ember. And last, a massive, pale-furred male with eyes of stormy gray, the largest of them all, was simply called Ghost. He stared at me, and I felt seen to my marrow. "They are my pack," Valerius said. "My family. They will help you." Help me they did. They became living, breathing tests of my control. Gale would pretend to limp. Ember would nuzzle a paw as if it were sore. My gift would surge toward the feigned injury, and I would have to hold it back, to look with my mind and see there was no true rift to mend. They were patient teachers in their own way. Stone would sit beside me during meditation, his solid, warm presence a grounding anchor. Frost's calm was a lesson in stillness, and Ghost always watched. Weeks passed. The color slowly returned to my cheeks. The constant grinding fatigue began to lift, replaced by a new kind of exhaustion from mental labor, but it was a clean tiredness. I could take a full breath without my chest aching. I could walk from my chamber to the solar without needing to stop. It was a foreign, exhilarating feeling. I was not yet strong, but I was no longer dying. My world, once confined to sick rooms and gardens, began to expand beyond the practice chambers. Valerius, to the clear surprise of his council, started bringing me to their meetings. "You have a mind that sees patterns," he stated, brooking no argument. "Use it." The council chamber was a circular room of dark wood and maps. 12 faces turned to me as I entered behind the king. I knew them from Yvain's descriptions: Lord Berwick, the shrewd and often skeptical steward; General Gorvin, a scarred veteran with a tactical mind; Lady Lysandra, who managed trade and watched everything with hawk-like eyes; and others, each a power in their own right. Their expressions ranged from polite neutrality to barely concealed scorn. I took the seat beside Valerius, a smaller chair that felt like a throne of judgment. The first meetings were a lesson in silent observation. They discussed tariffs, border patrols, grain yields, the movements of Vorlag's army. I listened, absorbing the complex web of the kingdom's life. My mind, no longer fogged by sickness, began to make connections the others missed. The opportunity arose during a discussion on the winter grain reserve. Lord Berwick was adamant. The stores in the northern granaries are at 80% capacity, standard protocol. There is no cause for alarm. Something tickled at my memory. I had been reading agricultural treatises from the Royal Library during my rest hours. I had also overheard the stable masters discussing the early migration of birds and the thickness of the animals' coats. Folklore signs, but persistent ones. I cleared my throat. All eyes swung to me. "Lord Berwick," I said, keeping my voice even, "your figures are from the last audit, 6 weeks ago?" He nodded, impatient. "And they assume a winter of standard severity based on the last decade's average?" "Naturally. The farmers in the river fields and the herders in the high marches are reporting signs of a deep freeze. The old almanacs in your archive, the ones from 3 generations past, describe similar patterns preceding the long winter that starved thousands. If their lore holds any truth, consumption will rise by 25%, not 10. Your 80% will become 50, then 30. The outlying villages will suffer first." A heavy silence fell. General Gorvin frowned. "Farmers' tales and old wives' almanacs are not strategic data, my lady." "Hunger is," I replied, meeting his gaze. "If we are wrong, we have extra grain to trade or store. If we are right, we prevent a catastrophe that would weaken us before Vorlag's next push. The cost of being cautious is silver. The cost of being wrong is lives." Valerius had been watching me, his fingers steepled. He turned to Lord Berwick. "Commission a survey of the northern holds, listen to the farmers, increase procurement from the southern valleys by 15%. Do it quietly. We do not want to spark panic or inflate prices." His order was final. Lord Berwick's lips tightened, but he bowed. "As you command, Majesty." It was a small victory, but a tangible one. I had not healed a body, but I might have helped heal a future famine. After that, the council's demeanor shifted slightly. They did not welcome me, but they no longer outright dismissed me. Lady Lysandra, in particular, began to address comments my way, testing my knowledge of trade routes and resource distribution. I spent more time in the archives, cross-referencing data, building a mental map of the kingdom's strengths and vulnerabilities. My progress with my gift was less linear but steady. Master Aldrich devised a new exercise. We went to the training yards. I stood at a safe distance, my back against a sun-warmed stone wall, and watched soldiers spar. The first time a practice blade drew a thin line of blood on a man's forearm, the pull was violent, a yank at my very soul.
I staggered, my mental walls cracking. A trickle of my energy escaped, and the soldier's cut sealed instantly. He looked down in shock, then over at me. I had to sit down, head between my knees as the world spun, but I tried again the next day and the next. I learned to weather the initial shock, to let the pull wash against my fortified mind without breaking through. Then I learned to do the opposite. Aldrich arranged for a soldier to receive a controlled, deeper cut. "Now," he instructed, "do not just hold back. Assess, then, if you choose, direct." I felt the pull, the warm urgency. This time, instead of just building a wall, I focused. I imagined a channel from my well of light. I visualized the soldier's injury as a crack in his own essence.
Carefully, deliberately, I allowed a thin, precise stream of my energy to flow down the channel and into the crack. The wound closed, neatly and completely. I was breathing hard, and a familiar fatigue tugged at me, but it was a measured drain. I had chosen. I had healed. "Excellent," Aldrich murmured, his old eyes bright. "Choice is control. Control is life." My relationship with the pack deepened. They were often my companions during these difficult sessions. Frost's icy calm helped steady my breathing. Gale's restless energy reminded me to stay alert. Stone was a solid presence at my side. Ember would nuzzle my hand after a success. And Ghost was different. He began to follow me, not just in the training yard, but through the corridors of the keep, a silent, pale shadow. At first, it was unnerving. Then I understood. He was my guardian. Valerius had assigned him to me. One evening, I found myself in the king's private study, a room of books and worn comfort. He was reviewing dispatches. "The pack accepts you," he said without looking up. "Especially Ghost. That is not a small thing." "Why does it matter so much?" I asked, stroking Ember's head where he lay at my feet. Valerius set down his quill. "Because they see what is real. They do not see a title or a frail body. They see spirit. They see intention. Ghost would tear out the throat of anyone who meant you true harm. His loyalty is not given, it is earned. You have earned it." The words settled in me, warmer than any fire. I was earning things, not through birth or obligation, but through my own quiet effort. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I looked in the mirror. The woman who looked back was still slender, still pale, but her eyes, once dull with pain, held a new light, a light of focus, of dawning understanding. The Ghost was slowly becoming solid, but outside the walls of Blackstone, the world was not standing still. A messenger, caked in the mud of hard riding, arrived just as the first true snow began to fall. He brought word from Ethelgard. Vorlog was moving, not just raiding, marching. The shield was about to be tested, and for the first time in my life I knew I could not, would not, stay behind. The War Council that night was a vortex of grim energy. Maps of the Aethel Pass were unfurled across the great table, weighted down by daggers and cups. My brother, Kaelin's message was terse and desperate. Vorlog vanguard at the eastern gate, numbers 3,000, siege engines sighted. We cannot hold beyond a fortnight. Send aid or prepare to lose the spine. General Gorvin's finger stabbed at the map. We must mobilize the Northern Legion. They are 8 days' march away. We can reinforce the pass in 10, 11 with this weather. 11 days is too long, Valerius growled, his voice taking on a deeper, more feral timbre. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Kaelin has 500. Against 3,000 and siege weapons, a fortnight is optimistic. They will be overrun in 8. Then we must ride with the Royal Guard, said another commander. Light cavalry, we can be there in 6 days of hard riding. All eyes turned to me. The unspoken question hung in the air like smoke. What of the frail queen? I stood from my chair near the hearth. I will be ready to depart at dawn. A chorus of objections erupted. Lord Berwick was the loudest. Your Majesty, with all respect, the Queen cannot possibly undertake such a journey. The pace alone would— The Queen, Valerius interrupted, his amber gaze locking on mine, has just stated her intention. He was testing me. I held his look. The Aethel Pass is my home. Those are my people. You have taught me that my gift is a weapon for this kingdom. A weapon should be where the battle is. General Gorvin snorted. A healing gift in a rear camp is one thing, my lady. The chaos of a battlefield, the sheer volume of injury, it would overwhelm an untrained novice, not to say of— He trailed off, but the word hung there. An invalid. I felt the old shame rise, hot and quick, but beneath it a new steely core held firm. Then it is fortunate I am no longer untrained nor a novice, I said, my voice quieter than his, but cutting through the room. I will not ride with the cavalry. I will travel in a shielded wagon with the main medical supply train, but I will go. Valerius studied me for a long moment. I saw calculation in his eyes, and something else, a flicker of respect. The queen travels with the main host. Her wagon will be armored, a full guard detail separate from the medical corps. She does not approach the front. Is that understood? The last part was directed at me. I nodded. It is. The preparations were a blur. My personal guard, a unit of 10 stern-faced soldiers personally selected by Valerius and watched over by the ever-present ghost, was assembled. My wagon was not a carriage, it was a reinforced military transport with a suspension designed for rough terrain. Mistress Yvain and Master Aldrich would accompany me, along with a team of battle surgeons. We left Blackstone as a gray dawn smudged the sky. The royal host was a sight to behold, columns of infantry in steel and leather, squadrons of cavalry on snorting horses, the supply trains snaking behind, and at the head, riding a massive black warhorse, was Valerius. He did not look back. The journey was a trial of a different sort. The cold was biting, seeping through the furs in my wagon. The roads turned to mud, then to frozen ruts that jolted the wagon fiercely. I practiced my mental exercises constantly, building and rebuilding my walls against the background hum of minor discomforts, a soldier's chapped hands, a horse's strained leg. Each held a tiny pull, a whisper of demand. I learned to let them be, to exist as a gentle static against my barriers. At night we made camp. Valerius would come to my tent, often accompanied by Frost or Stone. He gave me brief, unvarnished updates. The scouts report the vanguard is larger than we thought, 4,000. Or, the weather worsens ahead, it will slow the siege engines but also our relief. He spoke to me as a strategist, not a protector. It was a gift. On the third night, as he turned to leave, I spoke. Valerius. He paused at the tent flap.
Thank you. For what? For not treating me like glass, even out here. He was silent for a moment. Glass does not insist on marching to war. Steel does. Then he was gone. We reached the foothills of the dragon's spine on the 5th day. The air grew thinner, sharper. I could see the proud, stubborn towers of Aethelgard, my home, clinging to the cliff face ahead, guarding the mouth of the pass. Smoke rose from within its walls, cooking fires, but also the darker, thicker smoke of pitch being prepared. The sounds of industry and desperation carried on the wind. We were still a day's march from the castle when the first refugee trains stumbled into our path. They were herders and farmers from the outer valleys, their faces gaunt with fear, dragging carts with their meager possessions. They told of Vorlag's scouts burning crofts, of patrols being ambushed. They spoke of the constant thunderous noise from the pass, the sound of siege engines testing the walls. That night the distant thump, thump, thump of the trebuchets was a dreadful heartbeat in the darkness. I couldn't sleep. I left my tent, wrapping a fur tightly around me. Ghost recurialized from the shadows, falling into step beside me. I walked to a small ridge overlooking the camp and my home. The castle was a jewel of light in the vast, dark mountainside, but beyond it, in the black maw of the pass, I saw other lights, hundreds of campfires, the besieging army. It was real. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but beneath it, a strange calm also settled. This was why I was here, not to be a symbol, but to be a tool, a healer. You should rest. Valerius's voice came from behind me. I hadn't heard him approach. So should you, I said, not turning. He came to stand beside me, a tower of darkness against the starry sky. I do not regret bringing you, he said, his voice low. But when the battle comes, you must promise me. You will preserve yourself. You cannot save everyone. If you try, you will die, and all you have gained will be for nothing. I have learned control, I whispered. Control is not just direction, Elara. It is also limitation. It is triage. You must learn to let go. The words were harsh, but I knew their truth. A healer on a battlefield must sometimes walk past a dying man to save 3 who can live. Could I do that? Could I feel that pull and choose to resist it? I didn't know. The final approach to Aethelgard was made under a leaden sky.
Archers lined the battlements, but as our banners became clear, a cheer went up, ragged, hopeful. The portcullis ground open, and there, in the courtyard, stood Calin. My brother looked a decade older. His armor was dented and scorched, his face etched with exhaustion and relief. His eyes found me, descending from the wagon, and for a moment the Lord vanished, and I saw only my brother, terrified for me. He crossed the courtyard in long strides and caught me in a crushing embrace. "You fool," he muttered into my hair. "You brave, brilliant fool." Then he held me at arm's length, his eyes searching my face. "You look different." "I am different," I said. Valerius dismounted, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Report," he said to Calin. My brother's face hardened back into the mask of a commander. "They have 4 trebuchets. The outer curtain wall on the eastern side is compromised. We've fallen back to the inner ward. They probe every few hours. Their main assault will come at dawn tomorrow, I'd wager, before your infantry can fully deploy." Valerius nodded. "Then we have tonight. Show me the walls." As they moved away, Calin glanced back at me, his eyes full of a turmoil I understood. He saw the sister he had carried, now standing in a war camp. I gave him a small, steady smile. I was scared. I was so very scared, but I was here. The medical station was set up in the great hall of the keep where I had played as a child. Tables were dragged in for surgeries, barrels of water and bandages stacked high. Mistress Yvain took command with a quiet efficiency. I stood in the center of the familiar, now unfamiliar space. This was my ground. Tomorrow the river of pain would flow here, and I would have to stand in its current and not be swept away. That night, as the castle prepared for the storm, I sat in my old room, the room of a sickly girl. I touched the familiar worn spine of a book on the shelf. I was not that girl anymore. I was something else, something untested, something afraid, but something ready. Dawn would tell the tale. Dawn did not so much break as it was torn apart by the shriek of incoming projectiles. The assault began with a barrage of firepots from the trebuchets, great arcs of blazing pitch that smashed against Aethelgard's stones. The castle shook. The dreadful thump of the engines was now a constant, grinding rhythm. I stood in the great hall, now a triage center, my hands clenched at my sides. My guards were stationed at the doors, their faces taut. Ghost lay at my feet, a warm, solid weight, his stormy eyes watching the entrance. The first wounded arrived within the hour. They were not the main assault's casualties, but men caught by arrow fire or shrapnel on the battlements, a young soldier with a gash in his thigh, an older man with a broken arm from falling stone. The regular surgeons moved with practiced haste, stitching, setting, bandaging. I felt the pulls, tiny, sharp tugs at my consciousness. I held my walls firm, assessing. These were not mortal. The surgeons could handle them. I walked among the cots, offering water, a word of comfort, my presence seeming to calm some. They looked at me with a kind of awe, the queen who had come to the edge of hell with them. Then the world outside erupted into a sustained roar. The main assault had hit the gates. The wounded began to arrive in a torrent, no longer ones and twos, but streams of broken men. The hall filled with the sounds of agony, the metallic smell of blood, the sharp scent of fear and burning herbs. A man was carried in, a spear still lodged in his abdomen. His face was gray. Mistress Yvain rushed to him, but her face fell. "The shaft is barbed. Pulling it will kill him. The bleeding is too deep." The pull from him was not a tug. It was a yawning chasm, a vacuum trying to suck the very light from my soul. My barriers shuddered. I saw Yvain's eyes meet mine, a question in them. This was it, the choice. I knelt beside the soldier. His eyes were wide with pain and terror. I placed a hand on his clammy forehead. "Be still," I whispered. Then I opened the gate. Not all the way, not the raging flood. I visualized a precise channel, a surgeon's tool.
I sent my energy into him, not to overwhelm the injury, but to follow its path.
I felt for the torn vessels, the pierced organs. My consciousness flowed along the shaft of the spear, reinforcing, sealing, stabilizing from the inside out. It was intricate, exhausting work. Sweat broke out on my brow. After what felt like an eternity, I looked at Yvain and nodded. Now, pull it. She gripped the shaft, braced herself, and drew it out in one smooth, terrible motion. The soldier screamed, but no fatal gush of blood followed. The wound bled, but it was a clean flow. The internal carnage had been repaired. The surgeons swarmed to stitch the external wound. The man would live. I stood, swaying, the drain profound, but I had done it. I had directed. I had saved a life that would have been lost. Word spread through the hall like wildfire. A miracle. The queen had healed the spear-struck man. The next critical case was brought directly to me, a man with a crushed chest from a battering ram's debris. Again, I worked, channeling my energy to reinforce shattered ribs, to mend a collapsed lung. It took longer. The drain was deeper. When I finished, spots danced before my eyes. "My lady, you must rest," Yvain insisted, guiding me to a stool. I drank some watered wine, my hands shaking, but the wounded kept coming. The battle was a living thing, and it was eating men. I lost track of time. I moved from cot to cot. Some I could save with a focused trickle of energy, staunching a severed artery, sealing a gut wound. Others were too far gone. The pull from them was a weak, fluttering thing. Their life essence was already too dissipated. To pour mine into them would be to fill a sieve, to waste my strength for a lost cause. Valerius's words echoed, "You must learn to let go." The hardest moment came when a boy, he couldn't have been more than 16, was laid before me. An axe had taken his leg at the knee, and a sword had found his side. He was bleeding out, his eyes already glazing. The pull was strong, but chaotic, fading. I could have tried, I might have saved him, but it would have taken everything I had left, and behind him, on other cots, were 3 men with severe but survivable wounds, waiting. I met the boy's fading gaze. I saw the fear, then a strange acceptance. I took his hand. "I'm here," I whispered. I did not send my gift. I sent only my presence, my compassion, as his light flickered and went out. A tear traced a path through the grime on my cheek. I had let go. It felt like a failure and a victory all at once. I turned to the next cot, where a grizzled veteran with a deep sword wound to his shoulder waited, gripping his pain in silence. I placed my hands on him and got to work. I became a machine of focused intent. The world narrowed to the next injury, the next channel of energy, the next assessment, save, stabilize, or solace. The fatigue was a mountain on my back, but I climbed it. I was the dam holding back the river of death, letting through only what was necessary, redirecting its flow. At one point, I looked up and saw Kalen in the doorway, his armor splattered with blood, a fresh cut on his brow. He was staring at me, at the scene, the surgeons working, the men I had stabilized resting, and his expression was one of utter, profound shock. Then it shifted to something like reverence. He gave me a sharp, soldier's nod before turning and vanishing back into the maelstrom. The battle raged for hours. The sounds from outside eventually shifted from the clash of melee to sporadic fighting, then to shouts of victory. Valerius's forces had broken the siege, driving Vorlag back into the pass. When the king himself entered the great hall, he was a vision of terrifying majesty. His armor was rent in places, dark with blood not his own. His amber eyes scanned the room, finding me immediately where I knelt beside a soldier, using the last dregs of my energy to soothe a raging fever from an infected wound. He crossed the hall, the wounded parting for him. He didn't speak. He simply looked at the head surgeon, an older man named Corvin.
Corvin, his own hands bloodied, straightened. "My king, we have treated over 300 wounded. Our losses are far less than they should have been." His eyes flicked to me. "The queen, she saved scores. Men who should be dead are sleeping." Valerius looked down at me. I was trembling from exhaustion, my gown stained, my hair escaping its braids. I felt utterly spent, hollowed out, but I was upright. I was conscious. "How many?" Valerius asked, his voice rough. Corvin swallowed. "By our count, 117 direct miraculous interventions, countless others stabilized. She is the reason our morale did not break. The men fought harder knowing she was here." 117. The number echoed in my hollow core. Valerius reached down. He didn't offer a hand. He simply slid his arms under me and lifted me as if I weighed nothing. I was too tired to protest. I leaned my head against the cold, bloodied metal chest plate on his chest piece. "You have done enough," he murmured, his voice a vibration against my ear. "More than enough." As he carried me out of the hall, a path cleared, and then a sound began. It started with a soldier propped on a cot, his bandaged chest heaving. He struggled to sit straighter and brought his fist to his heart in the salute of Valerius. Then another did it, and another. Soon the entire hall, the wounded, the surgeons, the orderlies, were silent, all giving the salute not to their king, but to the woman in his arms. No cheers, just that profound, unified gesture of respect. The life-giver, they would later call me. In that moment, I was just Elara, and I was finally, completely, not weak. I slept for a day and a night, a sleep so deep it felt like sinking into the earth itself. I awoke in the Lord's chambers of Aethelgard, the room that had been my father's. Sunlight streamed through the narrow window. For a moment I was disoriented. The memories of the hall, the blood, the pain, the desperate focus, flooded back. Then I moved, and my body protested with a deep, pervasive ache, but it was the ache of exertion, not of sickness. The door opened quietly, and Calin entered. He carried a tray with broth and bread. He looked at me, and the years of worry, frustration, and duty seemed to have softened into something new. "Elara." He set the tray down and sat on the edge of the bed, taking my hand. "I have been a fool, a blind, arrogant fool." "You have been my brother," I said softly. "You saw what everyone saw." "No," he head shaked. "I saw my sickly little sister. I did not see you. What you did in that hall, the men speak nothing else. They say you walked through the shadows and pulled them back into the light." He blinked rapidly. "Father would be... he would be so proud. Mother would be in awe." His words healed a different kind of wound, one I had carried since childhood, the wound of being a disappointment. "The battle?" I asked. "Borlag is broken for now," he said, his commander's tone returning. "Their assault was costly. Valerius's cavalry harried their retreat through the pass. They've pulled back to their eastern fortifications. It will be months before they can regroup. And the king? Organizing the fortification of the pass. He wants permanent outposts, a standing garrison. The shield of Valerius will not be reliant on one family's strength again." It was smart. It was right. But it also meant Aethelgard's ancient, singular duty was shared. I saw the complex emotion on Caelin's face, relief and a touch of loss. Our world was changing. I spent the next week recovering my strength, but also working. The wounded still needed care, though now it was mostly infection and recovery. I walked the lines of cots, not using my gift, but using my presence. I learned their names. I listened to their stories. My guard, and especially Ghost, were my constant shadows, but they no longer felt like jailers. They were honor guard. Valerius was a whirlwind of activity, but he checked on me each evening. Our conversations were different. Before, they had been about theory and control. Now they were about reality. "You let the boy die," he said one night. Not an accusation, an observation. "Yes."
It was the right choice, the hardest command a leader or a healer must learn, to sacrifice one to save many. You learned it in fire. I am sorry for that. Don't be, I said, looking into the flames. It means I was useful. He was silent for a long moment. You were more than useful. You were transformative. The story of the life-giver in the hall is already spreading to the troops in the field. Morale is a weapon, Elara. You have forged a new one for this kingdom. He paused. And for me. I looked at him then. The firelight danced in his amber eyes, softening the hard lines of his face. What do you mean? I have ruled alone for a very long time, he said, his voice low. I have had advisors, generals, allies. I have never had a partner, someone who sees the same threats, who carries a different kind of weight. Our marriage began as a transaction. I would see it become an accord. My heart thudded against my ribs. An accord? A treaty between equals, for the good of the realm. He wasn't speaking of poetry or passion. He was speaking of something deeper, more enduring. Respect, trust, shared purpose. It was more than I had ever dreamed of. I would like that, I whispered. A week later, in the courtyard of Athelgard, surrounded by soldiers and the people of the Highlands, we were formally wed, not in the grand cathedral of the capital, but here, where stone and sky met. It was simple, solemn. We spoke vows we had written ourselves, promises of loyalty, counsel, and shared stewardship. When he placed a crown on my head, a lighter, elegant circlet of silver woven like mountain laurel, it felt not like a weight, but a completion. Lady Rowena was not in attendance. She had been quietly assigned to a distant estate. The council members who had come for the campaign witnessed the marriage, and their faces held no mockery now, only a watchful, calculating respect. We had won the battle, but I had won my place. We returned to Blackstone not as king and political bride, but as monarchs. The court's reception was a study in subdued awe. The story of the Athelgard healing had grown in the telling, but the truth was impressive enough. I took my place on the council not as an observer, but as a voice. When Lord Berwick again questioned a budget allocation for the expanded medical corps I proposed, a corps trained in the techniques of triage and emergency care I was helping to codify, it was General Gorvin who spoke up. The Queen's folk remedies saved a third of my men, Berwick. Her corps gets its funding. The shift was seismic. My first act as Queen Regent was to establish the Haven, a school and hospital within Blackstone. Mistress Yvain and Master Aldrich led it. We took in not just the sick, but orphans of the war, training them as healers or stewards. It became a center of compassion in a kingdom used to hardness. Valerius supported it all. He gave me the resources and the authority. In turn, my insights into logistics and morale, honed from a life of observation and my new understanding of the kingdom's pulse, made his rule more effective. We balanced each other. His strength was the sword. Mine was the stitch that healed the wound the sword made. One evening, months after our return, we walked in the castle's high garden, the wolves roaming around us. Frost and Gale played a chasing game, while Stone and Ember lounged. Ghost walked between Valerius and me, as always. The reports from the eastern border are calm. Vorlag is licking its wounds. Your brother's new garrison grows stronger every day. Good, I said. I stopped, looking out over the twinkling lights of the capital below. It is a strange thing, to have wanted nothing but not to be a burden, and to find yourself responsible for so much. Responsibility is the price of power, and you, Elara, have more power than you know. Not just the gift, the power to inspire loyalty, to see clearly, to heal systems as well as bodies. He turned to me. You were wrong, you know, in the beginning. About what? I thought I was saving you, teaching you control to save your life, to use your gift. But you, Elara, are saving this kingdom from its own slow decay of spirit, and you are saving me from the loneliness of eternity. In the starlight, his ancient eyes were not frightening, they were beautiful. He leaned down, his movement slow, giving me every chance to retreat. I did not. His lips brushed mine, a kiss that was not fire, but a solemn seal, a promise, an accord made complete. It was the beginning of everything. Peace, we learned, was not a static condition, but a vigilant garden requiring constant tending. The external threat of Vorlag receded, but within the court of Blackstone, old jealousies and new fears festered in the shadows. Our accord, the visible partnership between the immortal Wolf King and the once frail life-giver, disrupted centuries of tradition and power balances. I was no longer an object of pity, but a center of influence, and influence attracts moths and venom in equal measure. The most persistent shadow was Lord Malachi, a distant cousin to the royal line. He was a man of exquisite manners, sharp intellect, and boundless ambition. He had, I learned from discreet inquiries by Lady Lysandra, expected to be Valerius's closest adviser after the marriage, perhaps even envisioning a regency if my predicted early demise had come. My survival and rise thwarted those ambitions. He opposed my initiatives with polished, reasonable-sounding arguments. The haven was a noble drain on the treasury.
My suggested reforms to the land tenure laws for returning soldiers were dangerously destabilizing to the agrarian order. He always bowed, always smiled, and his words were like poisoned honey. Valerius dismissed his concerns, but Malachi's faction in the council grew, men unnerved by change, by a queen who derived power from compassion rather than lineage. The true test came with the plague of Greywater. A wasting sickness swept through the river town of Greywater Hold, south of the capital. It was a merchant hub, and panic threatened to strangle trade. The healers were baffled. It responded to no common remedy. People weakened, coughed blood, and died within a week. Quarantines were enacted, but rumors spread of a curse, of divine punishment. Lord Malachi saw his opportunity. At an emergency council, his face was a mask of grave concern. "Your Majesties, we must consider drastic measures. Greywater must be sealed completely, no one in or out. Let the sickness burn itself out. It is harsh, but to risk spread to the capital, to the heartland, the toll would be catastrophic." "You propose to condemn an entire town to death?" I asked, my voice cold. "I propose to save the kingdom, my queen," he replied smoothly. "Sometimes a limb must be amputated to save the body. Sentiment cannot guide statecraft." I felt Valerius's tension beside me. He knew the brutal calculus of rule. Isolating Greywater was the militarily sound, coldly logical choice. But I had spent my life being written off as a lost cause. I would not do that to a town of thousands. "No," I said. The council fell silent. "I will go to Greywater." Uproar. Valerius's hand closed around my wrist under the table, a warning grip. "Elara, you cannot." "My gift is understanding illness at its essence," I argued, pulling my hand free to address the room. "I do not just heal wounds, I feel the rift in life force. If I can go there, if I can touch this sickness, perhaps I can understand it, find its source, heal it at the root." "It is too great a risk," General Gorvin boomed. "If you fall ill, if you are lost—" "If I do nothing, Greywater is lost regardless. And if this plague spreads, what then? Amputate another limb, and another, until the kingdom is a crippled trunk? My gift is a tool for this. Let me use it." I turned to Valerius. His amber eyes burned with conflict. He saw the risk, he also saw the potential, and he saw the defiance in me, the same defiance that had brought me to Ethelgard. "A full contingent of guards," he said finally, his voice allowing no argument. "The cleanest protocols. You go not as a healer to walk the streets, but as a general to a command post. You examine the sick brought to you under heavy guard. 2 days. If you find nothing in 2 days, we enact the quarantine." It was a compromise. Malachi looked displeased, but nodded. "The king's wisdom is, as ever, sound." The journey to Greywater Hold was somber. The vibrant town was eerily quiet, the air tinged with the smell of fear and pungent smoke from burning sulfur and herbs. My command post was a fortified manor on a hill overlooking the town. The sick were brought to a separate pavilion.
I wore protective linens over my clothes, a mask of clean cloth soaked in vinegar. The first patient was a young woman, burning with fever, her skin pale and waxy. I approached, my guards tense. Ghost, who had insisted on coming, growled low in his throat, sensing the wrongness in the air. I placed my hands on the woman's forehead, ignoring the risk. I closed my eyes and dropped my innermost barriers, not to heal, but to perceive. I sent a thread of my awareness into her. It was like diving into a swamp. Her life force was not just weak, it was being eaten, corroded by a clinging, insidious darkness. This was no natural plague. It had a signature, a vile, intelligent hunger. It was magic, dark, parasitic magic. I pulled back, shaken. It's not a sickness, it's a curse, a living curse feeding on life force. The head town healer, an old woman named Agnes, paled. A curse? But who? Why? That was the question. I had several critically ill brought before me. As I examined them, I traced the pattern of the corruption. It was strongest around the town's main well, the source of the water. Someone had poisoned not the water itself, but the spirit of the place. This was an act of sabotage, of terror, and it required profound, malicious power. I thought of Malachi's swift, logical solution, seal and burn. To cover the evidence? On the second day, as I prepared to report my findings to Valerius by hawk, a commotion erupted at the perimeter. Shouts, the clash of steel. My guards closed ranks around me. Ghost stood before me, lips pulled back in a silent snarl. A figure cloaked in black, moving with uncanny speed, broke through the line, not to attack me, but to hurl a clay flask into the clean water barrel beside the pavilion. It shattered. An inky, smoke-like substance billowed out, not dissipating, but coiling like a serpent. It smelled of rot and magic. The curse, in a concentrated dose. The cloaked figure melted back into the chaos. The dark smoke coiled toward a guard who had been cut in the skirmish. It sought his wound. I didn't think. I stepped forward, between the smoke and the guard. I opened myself, not to heal, but to absorb. I became a vortex. The parasitic curse, sensing a vast, pure source of life force, streamed toward me. It hit my core like a wave of freezing, vile poison. I cried out, falling to my knees as it tried to burrow in, to eat me from the inside. But my gift, my soul-healing nature was its opposite. It wasn't a defense, it was a battleground. Inside me a war raged, my light against its darkness. The corruption spread through my channels, a burning agony. I felt my own energy being consumed, but I also felt the curse's structure, its fragile, crafted nature. It was not infinite, it was a weapon, and like all weapons, it could be broken. I gathered every ounce of my will, every shred of the control Valerius and the masters had taught me. Instead of pushing the darkness out, I pulled it all in, concentrating it in the center of my being. Then, with a scream that tore from my soul, I focused my entire gift, my entire life force into a single white-hot point of purifying light and erased it. The darkness vanished. The pavilion was silent. I collapsed, vomiting black bile onto the grass. I was ice cold, my vision tunneling, but I was alive and uncorrupted. I had broken the curse. The attack proved everything. This was no natural disaster, but an attack meant to force Valerius's hand, to discredit me if I failed, or to kill me if I succeeded. The captured attacker, a mercenary with Vorlag coin in his purse, broke under questioning. He had been hired through intermediaries, but the description of the man who provided the cursed flask matched Lord Malachi's personal alchemist. We had our shadow. When I returned to Blackstone, carried again in Valerius's arms, I was not the triumphant life-giver. I was pale, trembling, my spirit bruised from the internal war. But I brought the truth. Valerius's rage was a silent, terrifying thing.
That night, Lord Malachi was arrested for treason and attempted regicide. His faction crumbled. The cure for Greywater, once the curse's source was cleansed from the well, was simple purification rituals. The town was saved. In the quiet aftermath, Valerius held me as I shook from delayed shock. "You absorbed it," he whispered, awe and horror in his voice. "You used yourself as a filter for poison. It was the only way to understand it, to break it," I murmured into his tunic. "He tried to use logic as a weapon. I used my weakness as a shield." He held me tighter. "It is not weakness. It is a courage I have never known. You walked into the darkness and forced it to face your light. The shadow in the court was gone, and my light, tested in the vilest of fires, burned all the brighter for it." Years are curious things. When each day is a struggle for breath, they drag like centuries. When life is full of purpose, they flow like a swift river. 5 years passed since my wedding in the courtyard of Aethelgard. The kingdom of Valerius knew a peace forged in the fires of Aethel Pass and protected by vigilance. The haven flourished, training a new generation of healers who combined traditional medicine with the mental disciplines of energy management I taught them. We could not replicate my gift, but we could teach focus, triage, and compassionate care. I was no longer just the life giver. I was the Raven Queen, a title given by the people for the dark hair that now held silver strands at the temples, and for the wisdom they attributed to me. My body, while never robust, was steady, a carefully managed vessel for a formidable spirit. Valerius and I had settled into the rhythm of our accord. We ruled from the same heart, though it beat with 2 different strengths. He was the unyielding mountain. I was the river that shaped the land around it. Our private moments were a refuge. He would tell me stories of centuries past, of forests that were now cities, of kings whose names were dust. I would share insights from the haven, or clever solutions from the common folk that solved problems the council debated for weeks. The wolves were our constant companions. Frost remained Valerius's shadow, a silent confidant. Gale's restless energy found an outlet in running messages between the castle and the outposts. Stone was a favorite with the children at the haven, patient and solid as his name. Ember, ever curious, took to following the master gardeners, becoming an unlikely guardian of the herb plots. And Ghost. Ghost was mine, my silent brother, my protector, my friend. He slept at the foot of my bed, accompanied me on every walk, every visit to the town. He understood my moods without a word, a nudge of his great head when I was pensive, a soft woof to alert me to someone approaching, a steady presence between me and any stranger until he deemed them safe. Our family grew, but not by blood. My body, Master Aldrich confirmed after a gentle but frank examination, could not sustain a pregnancy. The toll of a new life drawing on my already carefully balanced life force would be fatal. The news was a quiet sorrow, a hollow space in the future I had vaguely imagined. Valerius found me weeping in the garden the evening I learned. He did not offer empty comfort. He sat beside me on the stone bench, Ghost leaning against my legs. "A dynasty is not built only on bloodlines," he said, his voice rumbling in the twilight. "It is built on legacy, on what you build that lasts beyond you. Look at what you have already built. The haven, the loyalty of a kingdom. That is your child, Elara, and it will outlive us both." His words were a balm, and he was right. We began to formally adopt. First came Anya, a girl of 8 whose parents had been healers lost in the Greywater plague. She had a quiet, observant nature and an innate talent for herbalism. Then Leo, a boy of 12, the son of a soldier who died at Aethel Pass. He was fierce, loyal, and desperate for a place to belong. Finally, little Maya, a toddler found abandoned at the haven's gates, sickly and weak. I spent weeks pouring careful, measured energy into her, not to perform a miracle, but to gently strengthen her fragile constitution. She grew plump and bright-eyed, her laughter echoing in the stone halls. They called us mother and father. They squabbled and learned and brought a chaotic, joyful life into the ancient keep. Kaelin visited often, now a proud uncle, married to a cheerful noblewoman from the southern provinces. He would watch me direct the children, debate with ambassadors, or walk with Valerius and the pack, and shake his head with a smile.
"I still cannot believe it," he'd say. "You are a force of nature." The true test of our unconventional family came during the great blizzard of the 8th year. Snow fell for 10 days without cease, burying the capital, isolating villages. Reports trickled in of roofs collapsing, of starvation in the high valleys. The council was overwhelmed. In the midst of the crisis, Leo, now a bold 17, took a group of older Haven students and guards on what he called a rescue run to a trapped hamlet, against direct orders. An avalanche was triggered. Leo was buried. The message, when it came, was grim. Prince Leo missing, presumed lost. Valerius's face turned to stone. My heart stopped. Without a word, I began pulling on my furs. "Elara, no," Valerius commanded. "The storm is a fury. The pass is unstable. The guards can search." "It is my son," I said, my voice trembling not with weakness, but with a mother's terror. "I am not going to sit by a fire while he is in the dark." I looked at Ghost. He was already at the door, ready. Valerius saw my resolve, the same resolve that had faced a battlefield and a curse. He cursed, a low, vicious sound, and began armoring himself. Then we go together. The journey was a nightmare of white wind and biting cold. The wolves led the way, their senses cutting through the blinding snow. We reached the avalanche site, a monstrous tumble of snow and rock. The rescue team was digging fruitlessly. I could feel nothing, no life, just the howling void of the storm and my own dread. Then Ghost began to dig, not at the main slide, but off to the side, at a rocky outcrop. He dug with furious intensity. Valerius and the guards joined him. After an hour of desperate labor, they uncovered a small crevice, and inside, shivering but alive, was Leo, along with 2 younger boys he had shielded with his own body. He was hypothermic, his leg at a bad angle, but his eyes opened when he saw me. "Mother, I'm sorry." I didn't scold him. I knelt in the snow, placed my hands on his frozen face, and sent a warm, steady stream of energy into him, not to heal the break yet, but to drive out the deadly cold, to fortify his flickering life force. Valerius lifted him gently.
On the arduous journey back, Leo tucked against his father's chest. I walked beside them. Valerius looked at me, snow crusting his lashes. "You would have dug through the mountain with your bare hands," he said. "Yes," I replied simply. That night, safe in Blackstone, with Leo sleeping soundly after his leg was set, Valerius and I stood in our chamber. The storm still raged outside, but inside there was peace. "An accord," he said, pulling me close. "A partnership, a family. You have given me more in a decade than I had in 4 centuries. I leaned into his solid strength. "You gave me a life. I am just living it." The pack was curled around the hearth. Frost, gale, stone, ember. Ghost lay across the threshold, guarding his human cubs. We were a mosaic, a Lycan king, a soul healer, adopted children, and wolves. Not a traditional dynasty, but a pack. And the heart of that pack, I realized, was not strength in the singular, but strength in the bond. It was a heart I had been born with, one that had almost killed me with its openness. Now, tempered and controlled, it was what held us all together. It was the strongest thing I knew. The final chapter of a life is not written in its last moments, but in the echoes it leaves behind. I, Elara, once called too weak for a king, lived to see 63 summers, a monumental age for one who was not expected to see 25. My hair was fully silver, my hands carried the gentle tremor of age, and the careful balance of my life force required more rest. But my mind remained sharp, my heart full. Valerius, my ancient king, seemed to age beside me in spirit, if not in body. The relentless centuries in his eyes had softened into a contented watchfulness. We would sit for hours in our solar, he with his reports, I with my embroidery or letters from the Haven's far-flung chapters, the wolves dozing at our feet.
Our children were grown. Anya was the headmistress of the Haven, a brilliant healer and administrator, married to a kind-hearted scholar. Leo was a captain in the Royal Guard, his impulsive bravery honed into steadfast leadership, with a wife and a boisterous young son of his own who loved to tug on Frost's fur. Maya was an artist, her paintings capturing the light of the mountains and the spirit of the people. Our legacy was not a bloodline, but a tapestry woven into the kingdom itself. The Ethel Pass stood strong, guarded by a mixed garrison of Valerius's soldiers and Ethel Highlanders. The laws I had championed provided for veterans and supported freeholders. The Haven's methods were standard across the realm. The story of the sickly girl who became the life-giver was a folktale told to children, a lesson that strength has many faces. The shadow of Vorlag never fully lifted, but it was contained. A lasting peace treaty, one I had helped negotiate, had held for a decade. It was built not on overwhelming force, but on mutual interest and the formidable reputation of the Raven Queen and her Wolf King. One autumn afternoon, when the light was gold and the air crisp, I walked in the high garden alone, Ghost a slow gray-muzzled shadow at my side. The others had passed over the years. Brave, loyal Gale first, then gentle Stone, playful Ember, and finally, just last winter, solemn Frost. Only Ghost remained, as if keeping his vow to see me through. I felt a familiar, profound tiredness, deeper than the rest my gift required. It was a settling, a gentle pulling inward. I knew what it was. My well, so carefully managed for decades, was finally, peacefully running dry. I was not sick, I was simply complete. I sat on my favorite stone bench, looking out over the kingdom I loved. Ghost laid his great head in my lap with a soft sigh. I stroked his ears. "You have been my good friend," I whispered. He licked my hand once, his stormy eyes dim, but full of an old, deep knowing. Valerius found me there as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of rose and violet. He saw my face, and his own, ageless for so long, seemed to falter. He knew. He sat beside me, taking my hand. His was still so strong, so warm. "Elara." "I am not afraid," I said, and it was true. I have lived, truly lived. He brought my hand to his lips, his eyes closed for a moment. When he opened them, the amber light was blurred. "You remade this kingdom. You remade me." "We remade each other," I corrected softly. "An accord." "The best treaty I ever signed," he said, a tear tracing a path through his beard. We sat in silence as the stars emerged. I leaned my head against his shoulder. "Promise me something," I murmured. "Anything. Do not retreat into the centuries. Keep living with them." I nodded towards the castle where laughter echoed, Leo's boy playing, Anya discussing a case, Maya's music from a window. "They are your legacy too, our legacy. Be their king, be their grandfather." His grip on my hand tightened. "I will. And take care of Ghost. He has been so loyal." "He will come with me," Valerius promised. "We will both watch over them." The pull inward was gentle, like a tide receding. My breathing slowed. The lights of the castle below blurred into a soft, warm glow. The last thing I felt was Valerius's arms around me, holding me close, and the last thing I heard was his voice, rough with love, whispering against my hair. "Sleep now, my heart, my queen, my Elara. You were never weak. You were the strongest of us all." And I was. I was. If you liked the story, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon and comment for part 2.